Hello and welcome to America Can We Talk? I'm Debbie Georgatos. Today we're going to talk about collectivism and millions unemployed. We have economist Steve Moore joining us to talk about why we need to get America back to work, the virus police state or wise government, China's blame game, and finally, FBI in the time of the coronavirus. And of course, I'll tell you why these stories matter to you. Stay tuned.
Debbie Georgatos, host of America Can We Talk, is an author, attorney, and political analyst whose mission is to inspire the American political conversation about preserving liberty in the best country on earth. America Can We Talk is sponsored by GC Works, a Dallas-based company performing advanced technology research in the oil and gas industry.
And welcome again to America Can We Talk? I'm Debbie Georgatos, and this is today's First Five. We are watching in this country the utter collapse of our economy and the expansion of the federal government in record time, in just at lightning speed, and too few of us are paying attention to what possible consequences could carry for America. One I want to mention relates to the $2.2 trillion bill that Congress passed and President Trump has signed. This is, of course, in relation to the coronavirus and the need to get money to people who can't pay their bills. But I want to be sure you understand the level of extreme crazy in that bill. We've talked about several other days. There are new things coming to light in the famous. We had to wait to find out what was. We had to pass it and wait to pass it so we could find out what was in it. Things in this bill. For one thing, $600 billion, 600 B as in boy billion dollars out of this $2.2 trillion bill is simply the government sending money to itself. The government is actually funding itself in various forms through this bill, this rescue bill. $300 million to the Social Security Administration, not to pay Social Security benefits, but for the administration. $50 million to the Institute for the Museum and Library Services. We have $75 million to the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which should not even exist. $350 million for refugee assistance. We're finding out more and more and more things in that bill. And it's not just the size of the bill that is the problem. It is the precedent we are setting. It is the expectation we are setting in our society for more and more people who are out of work to think it doesn't really matter if I get a paycheck, because after all, I will get a paycheck from the government. Money will come in. Now, I'm going to say, folks, plenty of Americans want to work. I believe plenty of Americans would rather earn their own way, but not all of them. There's a healthy percentage of the American people who can sit back and say, well, I did work for a while, but now the government pays me. No processing what that means, which is your neighbors down the street who are working hard and earning money. They're the ones actually who are paying you. This is who is paying you in this country. So this is a massive bill, definitely increasing dependency on the government, the expectation the government takes care of us. And worst of all, this is what the Democrat Party has always wanted, a bigger and bigger power in Washington, a more collectivized government, a government that takes control of more and more private industry. And the worst part of the way the leftists see this kind of bill is they will treat this not as a temporary measure passed in an emergency situation. They will include every item of spending as the norm for all future spending bills. It will become the norm. It will become the baseline. It will have then, whenever any next bill comes along, there'll be arguments by the left, but you Republicans, you can't cut. We already spent X last year. You can't cut that. You can't cut it back. And so now you've got to spend that much or more going forward on every bill. Mark my words, this will be treated by the left as a baseline expenditure. Last thing on today's First Five before we turn to our wonderful interview. I cannot wait to talk to Steve Moore, fabulous thinker, fabulous economist. Many of you, he's been on the show before. I'm sure you know his name, but he's been out there advocating to get America back to work. We're going to talk to him about why he says that, what the consequence will be if we don't do that. To close out today's First Five, there are already predictions that under our current shutdown system in this country, country shutdown, we will have we may have job losses in the range of 47 million jobs. Not 47 million people temporarily are out of work because their business is closed. 47 million people whose businesses will be gone. That by the time we're finished with this overreaction to the coronavirus, we will have 47 million people who don't have an employer to go back to anymore, for whom we're eventually either going to have to find other jobs, new businesses, or as the Democrats are, just rubbing their hands together, can't wait for more people they can add to their dependency class, which only grows the power of the Democrat Party. This is crisis thinking in this country that got us to passing a $2.2 trillion bill, paying many Americans from the government, checks coming from the government, more than they would have earned had the company remained open and they'd stayed at work. It's an astonishing and dangerous time we are in, time for every American to be smart, to be wise, to be alert, to recognize what is happening to our country. And that, my friends, is today's First Five. As I mentioned at the start of the show today, we have a wonderful guest joining us, Steve Moore. He's joined us on this show before in America Can We Talk. Most of you probably recognize his name. He is an economist. He was one of the chief advisors to President Trump in developing his amazingly wonderful economic plan for America. At this time, he's a distinguished visiting fellow at Heritage Foundation and the Project for Economic Growth, which is a great place for him to be. But he is obviously a nationally renowned economist, and I want to dive right in and talk with him about the impact of the coronavirus on our economy and moving forward. So, Steve Moore, welcome to America Can We Talk?
Hi, Debbie.
Hello, sir. Let me just jump right in and say, I want to do one positive thing before we talk about where we are. Only a few months ago, my husband and I happened to see you at a conference, and everyone at the conference was celebrating how well America was doing economically because President Trump was following along largely with the plan that was devised for him. So just as a background, before we dive into where we are, tell us just some highlights of how well the economy was doing before we began to have to deal with the coronavirus.
Well, thanks again for having me. And it seems like 100 years ago, doesn't it? But it was only 4 or 5 weeks ago that we had the best economy, arguably in 50 years in this country. We had, a 3.5% unemployment rate, the lowest unemployment rate in a half a century. We had wages growing for all income groups. We had 6.5 million surplus jobs. We had lowest inflation rate, lowest interest rates. It was just a beautiful picture. The Federal Reserve Board was saying that our economy was growing at 3 to 4%, a faster rate of growth than had ever happened during the Obama presidency. And so it was a perfect picture, and just bam, we ran into this wall with the coronavirus. The good news about that, it's important, by the way, that you bring that up, because it means no country in the world was more prepared, for the economic downturn than the United States was, because we had this cushion that Trump had put in place. And the other reason that's relevant to the debate today is because we know what works to make the economy grow. It's not welfare programs, it's not giveaways, it's not all of these loan programs. It's basically lower tax rates, less regulation on businesses, sound trade agreements that put America first, and promoting American energy. And those policies created this boom. And let's get back to that. And I'm really, you and I were talking off the air, I'm really more afraid now of the response to the coronavirus by our government than almost the virus itself. And look, I have 3 good friends who are sick from the virus. One is on a ventilator, so I'm not minimizing the devastation that this virus is causing. But I'm right now, frankly, more worried about the devastation to our way of life and our American economy.
Steve Moore, I could not agree with you more. And let's turn to talking about where we are right now. Just again, in big terms, in big picture terms, we've only been under the varying orders in government, whether it's state governors or mayors or cities, varying orders that have pretty much frozen our economy in place, frozen the workforce. What is the damage you can already see to our economy in just overarching terms?
Well, we're starting to see the devastation really escalate with each passing day, and we're going to see. We've already got a lot of businesses failing. I can't tell you how many calls I get every day from small businessmen and women who've spent their whole life building businesses. I mean, it's heartbreaking, frankly, to see in just a matter of weeks great businesses, because they don't have revenues, and because the economy shut down by our government. And if they don't have revenues, that's like depriving someone of their oxygen supply. They die. And so we're seeing more bankruptcies. We're seeing vast increases in the unemployment rate. We're seeing people's life savings being vanquished and vanished by the decline in the stock market. So the costs, we have to really, what I've advised the president is, you've got to calibrate the economic costs of this shutdown versus the health aspect. And I'm a big believer. If we do this in the right way, we can reopen our economy in a health sensitive way that keeps American workers safe to the fullest extent possible. I talked to Fred Smith, who's the FedEx CEO, one of the great American, entrepreneurs of all time. They have 350,000 people working today. They're an essential business, and they're up and running in the United States. I asked him, how many people are actually getting sick? He said about 400. 400 out of 350,000. That's one out of 1,000. I said, how are you doing it? He said, we're doing testing where we can. We're having gloves. We're using masks. We're using social distancing in the workplace. We are disinfecting everything. In other words, this idea that it's one or the other, Debbie, is wrong. We can have an economy that's functioning, that keeps workers safe, especially in essential businesses and essential factories, without shutting everything down. And we can do it in a way that, I believe that we can keep people safe.
I completely agree. One argument that people make who are very, very concerned about the spread of coronavirus, number of people contracting COVID-19, is this idea, and I'm trying to get at helping people understand what you're saying, Steve, that we can do both. One fear people have is that or misunderstanding that causes them to resist the argument that we can bring America back to work, is a failure to appreciate how much damage is done long term by the longer our economy stays closed. And I think people don't see it in real life terms. They think it's like a carton of ice cream that you can, you stick it in the freezer. Oh, we can't access it for 3 or 4 or 6 months. Fine. We'll pull it out in 6 months. It'll be just like it was. But people, I think, need to help understanding how a long-term devastated economy, how long it takes to recover in real life terms, what that means to the average American. Can you address that?
Well, it's a great point. And, again, this is just such a hard thing to talk about, because I'm an optimist. You've known me for a long time. I'm an optimist about America. I think we have incredible entrepreneurs and incredible workers, and we're going to get out of this. But the problem is, every day that we wait, the economic damage gets, multiples worse. And you use the analogy of a carton of ice cream. I like to use the metaphor of a fine-tuned engine, because our economy is a fine-tuned engine. And we are, as Donald Trump has said many times in the last couple of years, we've become the envy of the world in terms of how well our economy has been performing. But I think a lot of the politicians in Washington think you can just keep the ignition on. You can just turn the ignition key after 3 months of a shutdown, and it's gonna just zoom down the highway. That's not true. Let me give you some examples. Businesses that are going bankrupt now, they have to sell their assets. They have to, lay off all of their workers. It's not as if you can just say, okay, you can start up again. They don't have any. They sell their patents, they sell their machinery, they sell everything they have to their creditors because they don't have any revenues. So those are the kinds of permanent damages that get done. I'm worried about the banking system. I have a friend who owns apartment buildings, and she has about 2,000 units. Her income is the rent that people pay. Guess how many people are paying the rent now? Practically zero. So she has no income. So she can't pay the bank that lends her the money to run the business. I mean, you see what I'm saying? This cascades throughout the economy. We better get this thing up and running, or I really worry that there's going to be a kind of financial collapse in this country that will cause a lot of misery. And I'm so frustrated because this is being forced on us by government. by bad decisions by government. I think the president made a mistake in saying we're not going to get the economy up and running in certain places by Easter. We can do that. We can do it in a safe way. Even we're waiting to April 30 is dangerous. But I live in Virginia. I got to tell you, I live in Virginia, Debbie. Our idiot governor is saying we're going to keep the economy shut down till the middle of June. I mean, hey, governor, there's not going to be an economy to reopen in June if you do that.
Steve, I'm so glad you're saying every single one of the points you're making, because these are exactly the kind of things I've been trying to say. You can't just shut it all down and think it just sits there and is ready to jump. I love your analogy to starting an engine after it just is dissipating. This frightened as people are, concerned as they are, recognize we don't really have the COVID-19 under control. We don't have a vaccine yet. We don't have medication that completely solves a problem. It is also a human damage to America to let our economy, much as I'm sympathetic for everyone suffering and everyone fearful of COVID-19, we have to recognize the human cost to people if you have an economy collapse. And then I want to turn to the budget the bill that was passed in Congress, a $2.2 trillion stimulus. And I know that people in Congress felt like they had to do something. They had to signal, we understand you're concerned, we care. But I am concerned about the impact of that on people's thought about how they make their way in life, how that now that they're forced to stay home, the government can replace that. It's funny money to start with, but it actually in some ways almost impedes the ability of individuals in the economy to get going again, because we start thinking, oh, it's the government. Don't worry, money doesn't come from my employer anymore, but it's okay, it comes from the government. Do you agree there's some damaging aspects to that $2.2 trillion bill?
Yes, I do. And I think you've said it well. And by the way, I was an advocate of providing some short-term relief for workers who have been unemployed because of this governmental action and this virus. And I was very much in favor of a loan program to make sure those businesses that I was talking about could get a bridge loan from the government and stay in business for the next couple of months, so that when we get the economy going, we get that V-shaped recovery that we all want to see. But what happened was this became a Christmas tree. When Pelosi got her hands on it, it morphed. I don't know how it happened from $1 trillion to $2 trillion. And by the way, you even stumbled on the trillion. I can't tell you how many times I see media say 2 billion. It's, because we don't even fathom the difference between 2 billion and $2 trillion. With $2 trillion, Debbie, we could have eliminated the entire income tax structure for an entire year on every business and worker in America. I mean, think about that. So, I'm frustrated by that bill, because I think what we're building now is a dependency culture again. Dependency on government, and that's very, very rotten. It rots the American spirit. That's not the basis for what America is. It's going to get hard. It's going to be harder to get Americans to go back to work, because Nancy Pelosi, in all her wisdom, insisted on 4 months of 100% pay for people. Now, if we're out of this in 6 weeks, most Americans, the vast majority of Americans, want to go back on the job. There are a lot of people who would rather just sit in front of TV and get the free paycheck and not have to work. So we do a lot of stupid things. This bill is problematic. I think I worry that people aren't going to figure out how to get these loans. It's a very complicated process, and I think that could blow up in Trump's face. I hope I'm wrong about that. And now, Debbie, they're talking about another $2 trillion bill. A trillion, folks, trillion. A trillion is $1 million. We're talking about $4 trillion of spending in just a few months.
We are, and it's so alarming. And another related alarming aspect is every time Congress passes a spending bill, we have, in the expectation of some people in Washington, mainly the Democrat side, raise the expectation that this is the new threshold, the new baseline. And so when we have, and we also have people looking at this bill, which was supposed to be, I think your term was a bridge or whatever your term, the notion, a temporary to get us through. But that isn't how the left is talking about these kind of bills. And I am concerned that as we move forward, whatever we're spending now will be talked about by the left as a baseline. Or if people on the right say we can't really spend that, we need to cut back, it'll be cutting money to the working American people will be the accusation against Republicans. So I'm concerned we've set an unreasonable, irrational threshold that the Democrats will try to hold us to. Do you share that concern?
Well, there was a lead article in the Wall Street Journal the other day called the Pelosi's blue state bailout. So she wants this next package to be used to just provide money to blue states that are already bankrupt because of their, crazy practices, their high taxes, and that kind of thing. So it's being used. What really concerns me is that the left is using this as an opportunity to basically pass the Bernie Sanders agenda. I mean, wouldn't it be ironic if the Bernie Sanders agenda passed under Donald Trump's presidency out of fear of this virus? We need to be so vigilant now as people who value our Constitution and our freedoms and our free enterprise system to rise up and speak out against out of control government at every level, at this local level. The Los Angeles mayor recently said he was going to shut off the water and the electric supply for any business that dare disobey his orders, like he's Joseph Stalin. And then you've got, the governors, like my governor Northam in Virginia, saying he's going to keep the economy shut down till June. And even in Washington, I love this president. I know he wants to do the right things. He's listening to the public health professionals, which is wise, but you have to calibrate. Mr. President, you have to calibrate the economic cost of what is happening to this country versus the health risks. And I know in the end he will do that. Thank God we don't have Joe Biden. Can you imagine if we had Joe Biden as president right now? I mean, how horrible it would be. So let's be smart about this. Let's keep people safe in the best way we can with the testing and the screening and the health resources we need. And then get Americans who want to go back to work. We can't force Americans to go back to work if they don't want to. I have a couple of relatives. They're not going to come out of their cave for the next 2 months. But many, many millions of Americans want to get back on the job. They want to feed their families. They want to be productive. That's what America is about. If we don't have an economy, we don't have a society. It's that simple.
I think other times you've been on the show, Steve, we made the same point, but you're alluding to it again. The economy is not about money and greed and wealth. It includes wealth, of course, but the economy is about the exchange it is about the contributions people can make to their fellow citizens, producing goods and services and earning money that they have a sense of self-reliance and self-worth. The economy is about human comfort and people's human comfort, not just greed. I also want to mention—
Debbie, let me just add one thing to what you just said, because I've taken a lot of grief in the media for being so outspoken and saying we got to get the economy. Oh, Steve Moore just cares about the stock market. He just cares about rich people. He doesn't care about people dying. It's ridiculous. I mean, as I said, I've had, several friends who've contracted coronavirus and gone through very tough times. So I'm not mitigating the severity of this. But to think about this, Debbie, who are the people who do you think are being hurt the most by this economic shutdown?
Workers, people who are
workers, not just workers, the lowest income people in our society. They're getting crushed. They're getting crushed. These are people who have worked hard for $15, $20 an hour. They're trying to make ends meet and feed their families and pay their medical bills and their rent. And now all of a sudden they're in an unemployment line and they can't make their ends meet. I feel those are the people who are going to be crushed by this. Look, I'm an upper middle income person. I can make it through this. I have the savings and the income to deal with this. I always laugh. All these university professors say, keep the economy shut down. They have tenure. They don't have to worry about their jobs. They're going to get paid one way or the other. It's the least among us that are being hurt the most.
Steve Moore, that is an excellent, excellent point. I also want to commend to our listeners something you wrote. You can find it on our website, americacanwetalk.org, on the homepage under shows, drop down list of links. It's an article by Steve Moore called Atlas is Shrugging. Obviously a play on Atlas Shrugged, Ayn Rand's book. She had a great quote with which you start the article. Government help to business is just as disastrous as government persecution. The only way a government can be of service to national prosperity is by keeping its hands off. And you spun off so many brilliant points from that idea that Ayn Rand had shared in her Atlas Shrugged. So I commend your writing and your advocacy. And I can tell you right here at America Can We Talk and all over the place in Texas, we are trying to spread the message you are spreading, which is getting the economy back is vital to the survival, the health, not just for money, but the prosperity, the wealth, the sense of comfort for the American family. So thank you for all your advocacy. Is there anything you want to leave with our listeners where they can go find more of what you write and what you have to say?
Thanks, Debbie. And let's, I hope everyone remains safe and healthy, but we've got to get our American engine up and running again as quickly as possible. That will, in the end, I really sincerely believe that in the end will save lives to do that, to get America's economy and our businesses flowing. And this is why everyone in the world wants to come to the United States, because we have the greatest economy in the history of the world. And let's get it up and running in the safest way possible.
Steve Moore, thank you so much for taking time to talk to me today, and thank you for all you're doing and advocating for the future security and strength of America. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.
Okay, folks, I just simply cannot advocate enough. Read the article that I mentioned Steve Moore wrote. It's at our website. I'm sure it's at here. You can find him on Heritage Foundation. He's there on their website. His writing, links to what he writes. He's just a gem and a gift to the American economy. And thanks so much to Steve Moore. So that, my friends, was Steve Moore, a fabulous, fabulous thinker. So glad he could join us. We're going to talk about next the virus, the coronavirus, but are we in a police state or wise government? I want to start with some clips. Just to be clear, President Trump had a press conference, a very sobering press conference involving what he had to say, and then some reaction or add on to what he had to say, add on to what President Trump said by Dr. Fauci, who is the main NIH advisor, National Institute of Health advisor to the president. This is following the announcement that it is possible in America we'll have somewhere between 100,000 and 240,000, huge numbers, possible deaths in America due to the coronavirus. I have Matt the Wonderful has this clip ready. This is President Trump and then Dr. Fauci.
I want every American to be prepared for the hard days that lie ahead. We're going to go through a very tough 2 weeks. And then hopefully, as the experts are predicting, as I think a lot of us are predicting after having studied it so hard, you're going to start seeing some real light at the end of the tunnel. But this is going to be a very painful, very, very painful 2 weeks.
As sobering a number as that is, we should be prepared for it. Is it going to be that much? I hope not. And I think the more we push on the mitigation, the less likelihood it would be that number. But as being realistic, we need to prepare ourselves that that is a possibility, that that's what we will see.
And that, my friends, President Trump and Dr. Fauci. I want to add, though, I want to play those because I don't ever want the show to be where I'm just Pollyanna, not dealing with the reality. We are in a time people are very concerned. Prognostications of many deaths in America obviously alarm every American. Having said that, I want to share some counter news that was also hardly gets reported in the news, hardly ever gets attention from anyone, because the main thing in our country seems to be, can we possibly get people more and more concerned about the virus? So I will tell you, there's a British medical magazine called The Lancet. It's been around, for 100+ years. It's a very old publication. It's like their New England Journal of Medicine, The Lancet. The Lancet published an article on Monday of this week, so just a few days ago. On Monday of this week, The Lancet published an article after their specialists, their experts, gathered data from around the world. And the key point of telling you about this is, and you can read this on our website, americacanwetalk.org, on the homepage under shows, drop-down list of links. In this article in The Lancet specialists, again, New England Journal of Medicine equivalent in England, the Lancet specialists said, based on all the data they have collected, that the fatality rate for people who actually who have COVID-19, who contract the coronavirus and have COVID-19, the lethality rate or the mortality rate, the percentage of people who die is a little under 0.7. 0.7. This is to contrast with, we've had all sorts of estimates made, including by Dr. Fauci, who originally, like 3 weeks ago, Dr. Fauci said in our own New England Journal of Medicine that the rate was going to be something under 1% or maybe getting close to 1%. Now we have people saying 2%, 3%. Well, when you look at the massive numbers of people who may come into contact with the coronavirus, then it's a huge difference to say fewer than 0.7% will die versus 2 or 3% will die. That's the first data. I want you to keep this data in mind as I get around to talking about what I really want to get to, which is Are we surrendering our liberty to a police state out of an overabundance of fear and a failure to put things in context? And I want to say, the media in this country is sensationalizing the coronavirus and the disease COVID-19. They are intentionally sensationalizing it. And by that I mean, when they cover stories, they never include, they'll say, well, we had, 73 people died yesterday in some city or something like that. And people, let me make clear, I don't want the coronavirus to exist. I don't want anyone to contract COVID-19. Everyone's life matters, health matters, strength matters, all these things matter. Having said that, you never hear the media say, but actually still, over 80% of people who contract COVID-19, who actually get COVID-19, are going to recover within a week or two and have had symptoms fairly similar to a bad cold or a flu. They never keep reminding people, most people get through this just fine. They never remind people about the very small mortality rate. What they do to sensationalize it, beside never putting bad data in context of the whole data, but they sensationalize this by embellishing and describing in great detail the suffering people go through as they experience this disease. I know, for example, cancer is a terrible disease. Diabetes is. Numerous, dozens and dozens of diseases are horrible. They involve suffering. They involve symptoms toward the end of your life that are extremely unpleasant. But the media doesn't do that in reporting any other disease. They don't go through this. Let us regale you with every possible disease and impact and what exactly happened and the stages of your suffering. They do this with coronavirus because they're part of the effort to scare you. Now, some people in the media might say, yeah, darn right, we're trying to scare people because we want more people to comply with social distancing. We want more people to comply with the stay-at-home orders. But you have to understand, the media is complicit in trying to encourage more fear and failing to be more accurate and honest in how they depict what is happening. But let me explain when I talk about the police state, starting with what's happening around the world. In Europe, for example, in the country of Serbia, Serbian police, Serbian soldiers are now patrolling the streets with machine guns. And this is to stop the spread of the coronavirus. In Serbia, when you are 65 years old or older, you may never leave your home until further notice. There's no end in sight to the government order. Until further notice, you may never leave your home. In Serbia, parliament has been disbanded. And so the leader of Serbia, who is the president, Alexander Vučić is running it like a dictatorship. Even other people in government are saying, hey, wait a minute. All of a sudden he has all this authority. And they have a 12-hour enforced curfew. They have criminal sentences. You are sent to prison in, no, that's a different country. Let me finish with this one. There are all sorts of orders being issued. Everyone jumps to follow them. In many of the former Eastern Bloc countries, uncontrolled cell phone surveillance of everyone related to the coronavirus. In Hungary, if you get prison term of 5 years in Hungary for spreading false information about the pandemic. So what if you were like someone like me saying, hey, wait, this is really bad, but there's not as big of as high of a death rate as many people are trying to claim. You could go to prison in Hungary. And this is a country we used to laud in Hungary because they were more alert to Western freedoms. I could go through list after list, and you're probably thinking, well, so what? Because that's Europe. We live in America. But right now here in America, we just heard Steve Moore talking about the state of Virginia has now said, you got to stay home for 12 weeks. 12 weeks. No jobs, no businesses unless it's essential. The government decides what's essential. The people have no say. The economists have no say. The people who want to work and the businesses who want to open have no say. We are surrendering our liberty in response to this virus. We're surrendering liberty. We have all sorts of orders, such as no funeral services, pastors arrested for holding church services for people who want them. And so we are beginning to surrender to a police state. And the way police states come about in this world is very rarely by an announcement ahead of time and a date certain that says, hey, by the way, we're bringing a police state. Police states come into existence because of the submissive attitude of the people, because they're afraid. Fear causes people to become submissive. They fear so much of what's happening that anything the government says is fine with them. No thought about, I wonder if this is exaggerated. I wonder if other medical people have different opinions. I wonder if we should be concerned about the health and welfare of our economy and have that weighed somewhere in the balance. None of that can be discussed. The government decides, and your answer as a citizen, your only permissible answer is sit down and shut up. I want to mention briefly Trish Reagan, who I don't know her, but you may know the name. She was a Fox business host. She was fired for saying that the coronavirus was an attempt to impeach Trump. And we're going to talk about more on Monday on this show about what is fair to say about the way we are handling the coronavirus. Is it actually an intentional effort to undermine President Trump? Because if you don't think it is, I think you're not paying attention. I'm not saying the whole virus is a hoax. Obviously, the virus exists. It's problematic, hugely problematic. We need to get to figuring out in China how it happened, hold bad actors accountable. But we are allowed in our country to make observations about how the left is using this virus to attack the president, Democrat media mob all day long, every day, using every decision he makes, every word he says at a press conference is being used to attack President Trump and his legitimacy and competency as our president. This is what the left is doing, and it's extremely feasible to have the left spreading fear, which is contributing to the decisions by lawmakers all over our country, governors, mayors, county officials, that are putting this virus as their number one item to be concerned about, and all other freedoms are then shut down. And this is, my friends, what happened to Trish Reagan. Now, this isn't the government shutting her down. This is her employer. But this is an employer saying, actually, you're not even allowed to question the motives of anyone who has any role at all in reporting on or enforcing any of the orders related to coronavirus. Everybody must sit down and shut up, including a Fox News host. Fortunately for me, Fox can't fire me, and I'm going to keep talking about it. I'm going to turn to other topics today very briefly. The Center for Security Policy in Washington, D.C., we've had their experts on the show many, many times, and they've been way out in front, trying to raise the alarm bell in America about the idea that we need to be aware how dangerously China is handling this virus. It's extremely important, people, to understand this. There's a great piece by Frank Gaffney at the Center for Security Policy called "We Better Get a War Footing Now." You can go to Center for Security Policy, I think it's .com, .org, I'm not sure, but anyway, it is .org. You can go to their website and read this. He's getting at the point, China, and I'm going to embellish on this in a moment, China, the source of this coronavirus in Wuhan, the same location where we have bioweapons labs, Chinese bioweapons labs, China is at least guilty of and complicit in lying about the virus, misleading the World Health Organization about the virus, trying to suppress it, silencing people in their country, medical people, doctors and nurses who are trying to say, we think we have a pretty big problem here. Can someone pay attention? So China engaged in that behavior, at the very least, shutting down communication. But far worse, and more that you need to understand about China, China is now literally militarizing their pandemic disinformation. They are putting out in English, Chinese, and other languages on their online, China military online operation. They are trying to convince the world that they were the good actors in this coronavirus and that the entire world pandemic is America's problem. And you can think, okay, but no, who's going to believe that? No one's going to believe that. People, of course they will. China is about 1,000 miles ahead of us in terms of propaganda. China is thinking about propaganda all the time. America is thinking about truth and freedom and defending free markets. China is thinking about how do we propagandize the world. And they're way ahead of us on this. So China is putting out information to the world, claiming that China has been responsible and very open from the start as soon as this virus came to be. Trump is only shifting blame to China, that really the problem is America, and Trump is shifting blame to China because Trump is racist. The stupid lie that the left has told about Trump since time began. China has figured out, oh, this racist line works in America and maybe around the world, so we're going to blame Trump for racism because he's pointing out that China was the source of the virus. China is engaged in propaganda. They're 1,000 miles ahead of us on this. Also blaming Trump, wasted precious time that China tried to help America, but we wouldn't let them. Trump made improper and misleading remarks about the pandemic. America's lack of openness and transparency is really the problem. America's health system, I mean, it goes on and on. I'm getting at the point. You have to understand, China is using the pandemic they brought to the world and caused as a weapon to clobber America. Mike Pompeo, our fabulous American Secretary of State, is for the first time in all of world history, he had a virtual conference with the G7 countries to say we need to unify together to shut down, to expose, to shut down the Chinese propaganda about the coronavirus. First time ever, the G7 has agreed to work together to fight propaganda. What China is doing is dangerous, both because they'll never take accountability for what they've done and because they're trying to use it to stir up anger and hatred toward America, which is always what they've wanted to do, because this is what China does. More on this next week, but I want to share this story with you. One last quick story before we rock and roll out of here. Amazingly, in this week, even though the coronavirus has consumed pretty much every day since for weeks and weeks now, you have to remember that before the coronavirus came along, when everything was going so well in our economy, America was looking forward to finding out the results of John Durham's investigation into the FBI, the DOJ's, I call it a coup, their hoax, their Russia hoax, their effort to lie to the American people, to cook up the false Trump-Russia collusion hoax, to capture headlines in America for 3 years, to make Donald Trump out to be a villain when he wasn't, to lie to the American people over and over and over about Trump-Russia collusion, which fell apart when finally the truth was told and Mueller had millions of dollars and every asset he could ever have needed available. He came up with a report that said, no such thing, never happened. There is no Trump-Russia collusion. There was no Trump-Russia obstruction. It just never happened. So America was waiting to find the report from the John Durham investigation, from the DOJ, about who was responsible for these lies, who committed crimes related to this, who needs to be held accountable for the hoax that was perpetrated on the FISA court, for 4 different subpoenas they issued, 4 different permitting the recording of Trump people. They issued surveillance warrants permitting the spying on the Trump team. Who was responsible? Who committed crimes? That report was the biggest news of the day, the anticipation waiting for that to come out. And now, of course, that has been eviscerated from headlines, of course, because all we can talk about all day long is the coronavirus. But there are a few little tidbits about this. I'm going to try to touch on other stories in the next few weeks and not just coronavirus, but understand new findings came out by the Justice Department, new findings by the Justice Department Inspector General that said the FBI repeatedly violated surveillance rules. And this stood in surveillance rules on the Trump team stands in stark contrast to the statements made, some under oath, by officials, by Democrats trying to defend the Department of Justice and the FBI. But the DOJ, corrupt to the core, willing to spy on their political opponent, willing to lie about spying on their political opponent, willing to drop or abandon surveillance rules in place so that they could spy on their political opponent. This is very serious. This is third world banana republic conduct in our government in Washington. And we all were waiting to find out the findings of this report. And hopefully we're still going to get something out of Durham, John Durham, and actually also Attorney General Barr, that exposes who engaged in wrongdoing and what it was and who should be prosecuted. But we have, of course, we have at this point that just impossibly important whole event in American history, the most corrupt event that's ever happened in FBI, American DOJ history, is off the headlines, nowhere to be seen in our country, because after all we can talk about is the coronavirus and how the left found another reason to criticize the president for his coronavirus handling. So, my friends, I'm out of time for today. I want to close this show. I'm going to turn to why it matters in a moment, but I want to encourage you to take heart, to stay positive, to understand we will get through this coronavirus. We have many reasons to be hopeful about an American economy that can come roaring back if we just let it. We have to value the economy for the reason the economy means human lives. Bringing the economy back means bringing prosperity, and it means blessing people with human comfort, with income, with money that they can use to take care of their families. This is an extremely important message to keep in mind as we're going to, over the next few weeks, apparently going to see more and more data that is negative and very sad about the deaths related to the COVID virus. So I want to try to wrap up our show today, as I always do, by telling you about the stories we talked about today matter to you. So to start with, our very first story we talked about was collectivism and millions unemployed and why it matters. Trump went big with good intentions, but millions of unemployed. This is the recipe for more power in DC, more redistribution, more collectivism. A $2 trillion is an unfathomable amount of money. Democrats will treat it as the new baseline of government spending rather than a one-time emergency expenditure. The pandemic of fear is tilting everything away from Trump's Make America Great agenda. Americans are questioning, have Trump and America been played by powerful leftists? This question will be shouted down by the mainstream media and the left, but it will not go away until clearer answers are established. And about the police state versus wise government, we have government officials are being cut incredible slack for unprecedented actions to contain and control a supposedly one-of-a-kind pandemic event. However, the Lancet's mortality estimate, less than 0.7%, is not minor, but it's not horrible. It is not unprecedented. Serbia, Hungary are cracking down harshly against people over 65 years old. Anyone with dissenting views shut down. After it's passed, what precedent has been set there and what's being set here? Coercive actions to combat far more lethal diseases like cancer, diabetes. Are we all going to surrender everything to the government because they're just trying to help? New police state urgency to vaccination procedures and proof cards. I want to ask you, what would you say, my listeners, if you had the government say from now on, we finally have a coronavirus vaccine, everybody has to get it or you can't leave your home? Would you say okay? Would you say, yeah, let's make sure no one can leave their home? How long would you be willing to stay home? What if you have the coronavirus shelter in place rules for the next 2 years, which is a reasonable projection of how long the virus may be a big problem? At what point do we say, no, we get to live our lives? Sorry, I'm a little off track, but I want to make sure that point was clear. Trish Reagan, is this acceptable? Censorship broadened? How much encroachment on freedom is tolerable in America? And on China's blame game, the CCP is cranking up the propaganda machine to level 11. America is to blame. China is innocent, says China. The World Health Organization appears to be completely bought and paid for as a voice for the Chinese Communist Party. The CCP appears to have unwavering belief in the power of its lies, but this will ultimately be their undoing. but they are a rising danger as the weight of world opinion turns on them. Pompeo has the G7 united against the CCP. UK's, I didn't get to talk to him about him, but Prime Minister Boris Johnson is particularly livid, as he should be. The problem for the world is not the Chinese people, but it is the Chinese Communist Party. And finally, the one non-coronavirus story, the FBI and the deep state in time of corona. CIA, FBI, DOJ abuses in the Russia collusion hoax off the front pages for weeks now due to COVID-19. But a new IG report this week is devastating, again, to the reputation of all of them. FISA abuse of spying powers was the rule, not the exception. Barr, Durham still pending, still very serious. The abuses of power by the 8-year leftist Obama administration are legion. The damage to the American system of government and justice has been enormous. The fundamental transformation is far more extensive than at first believed. The muscular, overbearing, police, state-oriented reaction to the pandemic feels like a continuation of a fundamental transformation, with Trump having been played to go along. America must find her way back to the foundation of freedom. And that, my very fine friends, is America Can We Talk for today and for this week. Email me at americacanwetalk@gmail.com. Please subscribe to my newsletter. Go to the website, americacanwetalk.org. Click on subscribe. You'll get a once-a-week email from me. And actually, we're starting a new thing in a few weeks. I'll tell you about that later, but it's a great time to subscribe. There's no cost to you to subscribe. And please remember that I do this show. Please know I do this show every day, Monday through Thursday, 3 p.m. Central Time, to speak up for America, the most extraordinary, precious gift of human liberty ever to bless this earth. That's what America is. It's our job. It's our generation's turn to defend that liberty. I'm Debbie Georgatos, America Can We Talk, where I always talk truth about America because America matters. I'll talk to you next time.
America Can We Talk? Truth about America.